Welcome everyone to today's Business as Unusual webinar. We are so excited to have you join us for our last session of 2021. It's hard to believe that it's already that time of year, but as we end the year, we are excited to have our guest speaker today joining us to walk through on how we can start 2022 off with some amazing intelligence and knowledge regarding the topic of AI. So we'll be getting started here in just one moment. For those of you joining us via LinkedIn and Facebook, welcome as well. We'll be pulling you in here just momentarily. So as we get started, give me one moment, folks, and we will get our live streaming service up as well. Perfect. We should be having our guests joining us. Again, those of you via Facebook or LinkedIn, welcome to today's webinar as we get you up and running as well. Make sure you've got a pen and paper or a Remarkable 2 or your phone handy. You'll want to take notes during today's session. Our guest speaker, Niko, Pipaloff, will be sharing so much great content with you. We were joking beforehand, you're all going to be data scientists by the end of today's session. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to today's Business as Unusual webinar, where we are speaking with industry leaders who are helping us survive and thrive in today's economic climate. My name is Lisa Baining. I'm an account director at Caffeine, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. As I mentioned before, we are so excited to have Niko Pipaloff joining us today. Niko is the founder and CEO of Hybrid Intelligence. And what we're going to cover with him today is really talking about your business problems, but framing them up in a new way on how you're building teams to help tackle complex problems. We're going to be talking about machine learning with AI. So why should you care about that? What are the learning opportunities that comes with it? What are the qualities you should be looking for a team as you look through machine learning and the type of people who are going to help you solve these complex problems? And we're also going to talk about this clean one room approach. That's literally what we have to help you make innovation scalable. So a lot of great content in today's session. As a reminder, for those of you who were the first to register for today's webinar, we do give out 5 $20 Grubhub gift cards to the first 5 registrants. So I'd like to thank Karen K, Colleen L, Gail N, Tony B, and Sarah P for being those first 5 registrants. You should have received that invitation yesterday. If not, please go ahead and reach out to us at Caffeine, and we'll make sure you get access to that. As a few housekeeping notes, we do have everyone on mute today. So for those of you joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A or the chat option to ask questions. I'll be monitoring throughout and be sharing those with Kathy and Niko so they can answer them as time allows and at the end as well. For those on Facebook or Zoom, I encourage you to also use the comment section. I'll be moderating there as well and feeding those questions over to Niko and Kathy. So with that, let's go ahead and get today's session started. So I'm happy to introduce my co-host, Kathy Steele, who's the CEO of Red Caffeine, as well as our guest speaker, Niko Pipaloff. Kathy and Niko, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, Niko, we are so thrilled to have you. This is a topic that we're all excited about, learning more about, and thank you for joining us today. So Lisa gave a little bit of a backgrounder on you, but I'd love you to kind of step our audience through, what you do at Hybrid Intelligence and a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah, sure. So I started, my background is in technology. My education is in computer science. I have a bachelor's in computer science. Started my career kind of in the IT realm, but very quickly moved into technology consulting. There was a company called Diamond Consulting that was very technology focused. Kind of gained my basic consulting skills there, and then eventually moved over to PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I was one of the founding members of our emerging technology lab. Essentially, this was a group that was dedicated to building new skills in emerging technologies and then applying those to help our clients do the same. It was a fairly unique endeavor. It was the only group of its kind, but that's really where I learned a lot about how to, set up and run innovation groups. And then in the last 3 to 4 years of my career, I've really honed my focus to a particular technology, that being machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Excellent. Well, we always try and tee up how this would associate to growth, and technology obviously is a huge growth lane to invest in, and I think it underpins all of the business functions and operations today: sales, marketing, ops, finance, and HR. But when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's doing as big of things as helping to detect cancer, but it's also really starting to be seen and integrated into manufacturing applications, preventative maintenance, equipment failure. And then we're seeing it also in our everyday life, and in using tools in our home like Netflix, the streaming applications that we watch TV on today, Alexa, those types of things. So I'm really excited about, it sounds very lofty and big in some cases, but I'm excited for you to kind of break it down and help us see the opportunities we all have in our business. So with that, I know that AI is predicted to reach about 98 billion by 2023 in terms of corporate investment, but it has been a little bit of a slow adoption rate for most businesses. So I'm hoping you can kind of set the table for us on, why is corporate innovation something that businesses should be considering in their investment strategy for growth?
Well, yeah, so I guess let's parse those two things out, because those are two kind of related but different topics: corporate innovation and then the particular technology of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And just so the audience knows, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. Machine learning is actually the more accurate technical term. Most common nomenclature uses AI, but they're really the same thing. They're referring to the same thing. So why innovation? Why isn't innovation important? Well, I mean, I don't know if the folks have noticed, but the world is changing faster and faster, and it's becoming ever increasingly more difficult to keep up. I just think it's paramount. I don't think a business is going to survive if it can't learn new skills and apply them rapidly. Well, I mean, we're just seeing technology basically transform industry after industry. So I'm going to be talking about one particular type of innovation strategy, that being an innovation lab. That's where I have the most experience. It's not the only one. There are M&A, you can do innovation through mergers and acquisitions. There's other corporate partnership programs. There's lots of different ways to try to do this. When you look at a more traditional company, a company with kind of more of a legacy, sometimes you have these large scale digital transformation efforts. Consultants like myself will come in and say, we're gonna modernize your entire technology stack overnight. And historically, these have not fared so well. It's just introducing that much change at one time. There's usually a lot of resistance in the company because of entrenched interests, and also, of course, you would need to upscale a whole lot of folks. So as opposed to trying to change everything at once, one other approach is this idea of an innovation lab. And it's kind of like planting a seed. It's a small group, a small part of the organization, and then you allow that to kind of expand from there. Just looking at the slide, what are we talking about here? So it's not just a brand, first of all. It's not just like, oh, we're going to just keep doing what we're doing, and then we're going to call part of IT, this new thing. It's important that it actually does have some very distinct properties that are different from the usual technology department within a company. So digital innovation lab, let's break that down. So we're talking about digital technologies here. So usually software, in some cases hardware, but I don't have experience in material sciences and biotech. Those are different types of innovation labs that you might find that are much more specialized. So just letting you know, we're not going to be talking about that kind of stuff. When we say innovation, we're talking about an innovation funnel. What that means is you have a funnel with a lot of ideas coming in on the left-hand side, and there's a series of ways to filter and prioritize those ideas, and then only very few of them, most often, will make it out of the end of the funnel and actually get implemented into the business. So you have to be comfortable with the idea that you're going to try things that are going to fail. And we'll talk a little bit about metrics and ROI and what the impact is there. And then when I say a lab, I'm talking about a specific environment, most often a physical space. Obviously, with the pandemic, that can be a little harder, and it can be done with a virtual team. But most often, you want a dedicated team of resources that are sitting in one physical space, and the environment is specifically designed to remove friction and barriers for trying new things. When I say the environment, I mean the charter of the group, what their mission is, the skill set of the team, but also the technologies they're using.
So almost like a little entrepreneurial company within a company kind of group, is that? And
Sure.
so how do you really get started on something? How does a company, start this type of a endeavor?
Well, I mean, the first thing would be, what is it that you're, I guess, defining the goal of the lab. Like, what is it you're trying to learn? What is it you're trying to develop? And based on that, you would hire a certain skill set of folks on the team, and then find a dedicated space for them. I mean, we started basically in a closet, to be honest. When I was doing this at PwC, they basically put us like in a windowless room. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but you do need dedicated people with a technology stack which is separated from the rest of corporate IT. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is.
All right, well, let's step us through the process that you're recommending.
Okay. Yeah, so here's a kind of a framework I had developed. So after running our innovation lab, which was based out of Chicago for many years, we had a lot of other clients reach out to us, as well as other parts of the organization globally, and ask us basically what you're asking: how do we get started, and what are the components? And so this is kind of a framework that I had put together. So I had mentioned the two main pieces here, which is the lab environment. So this is the space, the technologies, and the people you actually need to run the funnel. And the funnel is what you use to learn new things. So you have the lab environment, you set that up first, and then you're running projects through the funnel. So if you jump to the next slide, we'll go through each of these in turn. Okay, so foundation. So budgets. It's important that there is a dedicated budget for an innovation lab, which spans at least a couple of years, 2 or 3 years minimum. The thing with innovation projects is many of them fail, right? So if you are determining the success of the lab based on the first project you do, you might end up shutting it down before it can actually bear fruit. Innovation projects are unpredictable, and you have to look at an ROI is still important. I would never propose that a business do anything without an expected return, but that return should be measured on a portfolio basis over a longer period of time. So individual projects may succeed, may fail. The portfolio projects, that should deliver a positive ROI over the course of a couple of years. And this is where also executive support comes in. Often, if you don't have a C-suite sponsor for this kind of effort, it ends up getting shut down, because budgets, especially when budget is tight, this is going to be competing against production level, operational production things, and you need someone to kind of protect the group while it's developing and learning and eventually bearing fruits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I also believe it's just, if you don't have dedicated resources to something like this, think about it as an investment strategy versus an output of, and actually categorize it as an investment in how you look at your overall finances for your business. I do think you'd be set up to fail. The window would be too short, and you wouldn't be able to get that experimentation needed to build that foundation. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's talking about like the skills you need and the metrics. It's a lot of these things do tend to get shut down in kind of tough times. So to basically to have a longer time frame, as you're saying.
But we talked about, when we were prepping for this, sometimes you can start off, with a fairly small group of people. You could maybe recruit some talent that isn't as high cost as real experienced talent. So talk to us about the people side of the investment.
Yeah, actually, it's an asset to start to be small. You don't want to be a huge line item on the budget. We started with 4 people. And we had to get very creative on how we were recruiting because this was in the context of a consulting company, not in the context of a software company. So when it came to getting good talents as front-end developers, back-end developers, data scientists, etc., what we actually ended up doing was creating a tour of duty program where we would just reach out to literally anyone in the company that had a passion for technology, and we would offer them to join our group for 3 to 6 months. We would basically train them on the skills they needed. They would work on a particular project. So the group was called the Emerging Technology Lab. So we would pick an emerging technology, like it could be machine learning, it could be Internet of Things, it could be blockchain, virtual reality. We worked on all the different things. But essentially, the only requirement we had was that folks were super passionate and were willing to put in the time and nights and weekends to get up to speed. Sometimes we got lucky and we found folks that already had development experience, but in many cases they had never done any development at all.
Wow. So really, totally innovative learning on the job. That's pretty cool and exciting. But,
yeah.
We always talk about career building opportunities too. And so sometimes when you're not, in a job that you are in a management position, these are the types of things that you do to improve your own, portfolio of skill sets. So what about the technology piece? What are some of the things that are in consideration when you're thinking about the enablement piece?
Right. So the entire purpose of the technology stack is to enable rapid prototyping and remove barriers to do so. The technologies that are good for those two things are vastly different than the technologies that a IT department would use to run a scalable, secure, technology stack that runs the business operationally, right? So it's important to create a clear line that this is not IT, right? IT has a very important charter to protect the company. There's a lot of security requirements. So like, let's say I wanted to try a new open source library. IT might say, well, it's like, we have to do a security review. There's like a 100-point checklist you have to go through. That makes sense for their environments, but that kills innovation. Like, I need to be able to try 3 different libraries in an afternoon, right? To be able to just see what they do, see how, and I'm going to break things all the time. So in order to protect the kind of the risk associated with that, it's important to put an innovation lab within its own sandbox. I mean, technologically separated from the rest of the company. So that means dedicated connection to the internet, dedicated computers. It should not be on corporate IT's domain.
Okay, so truly like its own company infrastructure. I mean, that's pretty.
Yeah. So that way, you can play around, you could try things, you can break things, and you're not going to be taking down the company website.
And we have seen that.
Yeah.
So once you've enabled this digital innovation team, you built that foundation, you've got your people, you've parsed out how you're going to go at it from a technology stack standpoint. How does this get applied?
Yeah, so why don't we jump to the next slide? We can talk about the kind of the funnel. So the idea being, listen is like, how do we gather ideas of what to work on rather. Learn is how do we prioritize and then prototype those ideas, and then apply is how do we push those learnings and lessons and maybe even products out into the company. So I'll go through each of these. So as far as where ideas come from, for us at least, it was twofold. One was capability driven. So what was realistic for us to do? Like, what capabilities do we have? For instance, self-driving cars are super interesting, right? As a team of four, we didn't have the capabilities to build a self-driving car. It just wasn't realistic. So like realistically, you are a small, lean team, and what capabilities do you have in house to actually develop it? And then also, what are your customers? What's top of mind for your customers, right? Is it machine learning? Is it Internet of Things? Is it blockchain? Where's the biggest impact for your customers? So I mean, feasibility and impact really is the two things, and that's how I also would prioritize. Basically we listen to customers, we look at the technology landscape and see what's happening, and then prioritize based on feasibility and impact, and then importantly, build working prototypes. So especially coming from a consulting environment, there is this idea that consultants generally build decks, right? We work with Excel, we work with PowerPoint. At least for this type of group, most people learn by doing, and you don't really learn the true limitations and capabilities of something unless till you try. And so developing a working prototype is critical to that. In doing so, I mean, that's really where the learning happens. In doing so, you will learn. Let me take machine learning as an example. When I talk to folks about machine learning, I usually get one of two responses. Either they don't know what it is and have kind of dismissed it, or they think it is like the second coming and will cure all the world's ails. Once you start working with it, that'll cure you of those two ideas. Like there is very serious constraints on what it can do, mostly related to the data you have, but in certain environments, it's extremely powerful. And so you by actually working with something, of course, you get those insights. And then finally apply. So I talked so much about the importance of creating kind of the separation between this group and the rest of the company. This is where if all the lessons stay in this group, you're really not getting any of the advantage. You have to then find ways to push everything that you've learned back out into the company. And it's important that anything that this group would create, it would not support once it goes into kind of a production environment. So this is very much a prototyping group. If something was explored or developed, which folks think could be applied into the larger organization, it needs to find a home in the larger organization. And so there's going to be like a handoff there.
So, honestly, it reminds me a lot of the manufacturing process where you're, starting with a proof of concept or first article or a prototype of something. And usually it's coming from somebody else. And then, to try and get it to manufacturability, it definitely sometimes has to be retooled and tested and re-engineered. So pretty interesting. How tied, to the listen or in the listening part of the funnel, are you looking at like the business overall growth objectives and trying to find a way to align with where the business is heading in order to really get that C-level buy-in? Because it seems like those kinds of opportunities, if they're aligned with the vision of the organization's growth, it would be a lot more feasible to get the investment and get the appropriate other pieces to the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a piece that I actually forgot to speak to. It's nice. It's good to have an organization like this with some sort of executive advisory council kind of on top, which could check in once a quarter or even once, twice a year or something, and make sure that that the innovation lab is tapped into the strategic growth of the business and where it wants to move to, right? So you would expect someone like the CIO, the CTO, perhaps a digital officer to be on that council, and because they're going to be they're going to have the ear of the CEO, and the CEO, and they can basically help guide this group to particular technology opportunities that are aligned in that way.
And then, in the application process, that feels like, implementation, testing, and is there a number of like feedback loops baked in to that process so that you're getting, or you've got a time frame to evaluate performance of that, new innovation? And
Well, so testing and performance, those are concerns for a production application. And you would need a technology team outside of this group that would be dedicated to owning that. So this group, after it's proven something useful, of course, it could be different from company to company, but the way I've seen it work best is it then, kind of does a handoff to a more dedicated technology team, because this group now has to go learn about the next thing that's around the corner.
So somebody else takes it to the next stage of development is kind of the way.
That's the idea for something that's moving into more production phase. Yes. Great.
All right. So, in these types of scenarios, is there a certain size of company that is there size limitations to organizations from your experience?
I haven't, no. I worked at, a very, very large company. And my last client was a relatively medium small company, around 600 folks. I think a startup, like, you wouldn't do this in like a 10-person team, because then it would just kind of be the whole team. But I think medium to large organizations probably would take the most advantage here.
Okay. And then we've talked about how you kind of get there, how you form this. Let's step into the machine learning aspect. So, talk us through this.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, quickly, how are these two topics tied together? So, machine learning is just a technology of particular interest these days. My career, I had focused on lots of different technologies, but ultimately I found this particular one to be more important and more impactful than anything else I worked on. And that's why I decided to focus on this. So if you wanted to develop machine learning capabilities in the company, an innovation lab could be one way to do that. And of course, there are others. Okay, what is machine learning anyway? Let's start with an explanation of what traditional software is. Okay, so traditional software, there's some sort of input data. And then I, as the human developer, the software developer, I have to come up with the if then else statements, the logic gates that would take that input and convert it to some output. And that output could be a number. That output could be something that pops up on a screen. That output could be something that moves a machine, right? But essentially, it's up to me as the developer to figure out what is a particular algorithm and the particular logic gates, if this happens, then do that, else do something else, to convert input to output. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The way that machine learning is different is that it flips that logic. It says, if I give you a bunch of input data and I give you the output data that I would expect from that, the machine learning algorithm, figures out the logic gates. So there are certain types of problems where it's just not feasible to come up with all the if-else statements. So like, if I give you a picture of a cat, it's just a bunch of pixels, and I say, okay, define all the rules such that I can give you any picture of a cat and you'll tell me whether yes, it's a cat or no, it's not. The complexity is overwhelming. Like you just can't do it. So instead what we do is we say, here's 1,000 pictures. Some of them are cats, some of them are not cats. We will give you the correct answer for each of these pictures. Here's a picture, it's a cat. Here's a picture, it's a cat. Here's a picture, it's not a cat. The power of machine learning is that it figures out how to map input to output, such that and that's called training it. So once you go through that process and you've trained it, now I can give you a new picture where I don't tell you what it is because I don't know what it is. And the algorithm could hopefully, if it's doing its job right, with high accuracy predict whether that is a cat or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I think it shows up in sort of really simple forms like chat, where you're actually chatting to a bot, and it's fielding through some of the questions and based on what it's learned, and then it will transition you to a human if it gets to a point where it can't answer your questions automatically. And or like Alexa, you might be searching for something for Alexa, but if you're listening to same types of music, Alexa will start to suggest things for you. So I think, those kinds of use cases sort of simplify the different business applications or personal applications that we, pretty much experience on a daily basis now. So
Yeah.
what are some of the most common things that you've seen in terms of that businesses are investing in?
Well, you brought up some really good examples. I will say that if you have very highly structured data, so like say text data in a database, categorical data, more traditional techniques are, it can be used. Machine learning is extremely powerful with non-structured data. So media like video, audio, images, all of that stuff kind of got unlocked by machine learning. Before, we really couldn't do much with it, and as far as what are the type of things businesses can do, well, I mean, you're essentially trying to find patterns, hidden patterns in the data. And so the use cases are pretty varied. Actually, yeah, in this slide, we have a couple here at the bottom. So, well, let me speak to what we're looking at here. So there are two major categories of machine learning. We have supervised learning and unsupervised learning. I will say the names that have been chosen for a lot of the things in machine learning are super confusing. They've come from a lot of different disciplines. But essentially, in the example I gave earlier with the cats, that would be supervised learning. Supervised learning means I'm going to give you a lot of data, and I'm going to train that data with the correct answer, right? So I'm going to give you a picture, and I'm going to tell you this is a cat. We're in a sense supervised because we're saying like, it's like if you were to take a child and you would point to something and say, that's a cat, right? You point to something else and say, that's a dog. Like you're training the child to understand the pattern, right? That's supervised learning. There are two different kinds. And this is dependent on the type of thing you're measuring, whether it's continuous or distinct. So like regression models, the answer is a number, a continuous number. So like I might say, predict for me the price of a certain house. Let's say I train a model where I give you the square footage, I give you the number of rooms, I give you the number of floors, and then I ask you to give me a price. Because that price is a continuous number, then that's a regression problem. Versus a classification problem is, given the number of rooms and the square footage, tell me whether it's likely to be a house, condo, townhouse, or apartment, right? I've defined a set of categories. I'm classifying it into distinct categories. The reason these things are separate is because the particular techniques that you would use for one or the other are very different. So it's important at the very beginning to understand what is it you're trying to know. And you may be asking one question around a problem that's continuous, and then you might have another question that's categorical. That's fine. So you'd have to create two different models for that. So back to your question, what can you do with that? So here's some examples: predicting real estate prices, stock prices, employee churn. So spam bots are one of the earliest uses of a classification problem. Basically, we're training a machine to say, is this spam or is this not spam, right? Two categories, two distinct classes. Predicting employee churn would be like, is this employee likely to leave the company or not, right? You can ask that question in a binary way, which would be a classification problem, or you can say, what is the percentage likelihood that employee will leave, which is more of a regression problem, right? That's a continuous answer.
Yeah, that's perfect. I was already like thinking, the real estate like Zestimate, where you're getting a expected estimate for a price versus like an apartments.com where you're actually feeding it requirements,
Right.
regression versus classification and those two situations, but very
Yep.
interesting. So in terms of unsupervised, what does that look like?
So unsupervised learning is it's a set of techniques where you're trying to find the inherent pattern in something, but you don't know. Like I'm looking at clustering now. So imagine customer segmentation. Imagine I have a bunch of customers. I don't know how many clusters I should have. Maybe 5, maybe 20. There's techniques that I can just say, look at the data and tell me how things generally group together. I'm not going to tell you what the groups are. I'm not going to tell you how many there are, but find inherent patterns in the data such that like is similar to like, so this is where you don't know what the groups are, but you want it to group based on similarity.
Right.
Okay, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Social network analysis is another example listed here. So like, if let's say we're Facebook, Meta now, or whatever they are, and you just say, okay, find people that are similar to each other, or find people that are closely connected, right? But I'm not going to tell it ahead of time. There's going to be 150 of these groups. Like, the data should determine that, how many groups, right? So that's clustering.
Yeah, I would think about it like in terms of advertising and trying to target the right people through that type of a analysis. Yes.
Right.
Getting the right messaging in front of people.
A couple things I will say, the limitations of these things, because you think like, oh, well, wow, regression can do stock price prediction, right? Like this is just a money-making machine. All of these algorithms are limited by the quality of the data you put in. So that's the first thing to say. Also, they are always working on information from the past, right? So black swan events or just other changes in the environment, changes in patterns. Machine learning algorithms are assuming the future is similar to the past, which sometimes is true and sometimes is not true.
So I know Lisa mentioned that you were going to take us through like some real world examples. I think you've got something a case study that you're going to talk us through. But tell us beforehand, what a typical project could look like.
Yeah. Well, this lists, 7 different steps from generating a hypothesis to deploying a machine learning model. Actually, the only thing I want to really emphasize on this slide is all of the arrows that point backwards. Essentially, it's a very iterative process. And this is different than traditional software development. It is really more of an art than a science. It's you kind of like start with a bunch of data, you try a certain set of algorithms, you see what the results look like. Most often, the first time around, the results are terrible. You then start tweaking. You remove some data, you add some data, you combine some data, you create new features based on existing data. You run the algorithm again. Maybe it does a little better, maybe it does a little worse. But in each case, you're iterating and iterating and iterating. So it's very difficult to predict from the outset, okay, what data is going to be relevant and what accuracy are we going to get? Right? It is very much a kind of a process of discovery, which is difficult for some folks, especially executives that are looking for, give me a guaranteed result before we get started.
So is there any way to like fast track the evaluation process? Because I know we've built things like this as well, where we're trying to, give somebody some selection tools or criteria, mostly in that shopping formula.
Yeah.
How can you test this without, putting a human on testing each feature and function to make sure we're getting good outputs? Or is it really going to require a lot of human testing before deployment?
So in some sense, the problem is computationally irreducible. What that means is there isn't really a shortcut. Like you have to kind of do it to see.
Okay.
Um, but there are ways that people are fast tracking this, essentially running a lot of different algorithms in parallel. And that is there's a whole suite of tools called auto ML, auto machine learning, and it kind of brute forces the problem in the sense of like one of the key decisions that need to be made is what type of algorithm. So we talked about the different categories in machine learning. Given any one of those categories, let's say regression, there's probably at least 25 different algorithms that you could use, and they work better or worse with different data and different environments. So going through those one by one is painful and tedious. So there's been a series of tools where they just run through all of them. They just feed your data through all of them. Compute power is relatively cheap now. They brute force the problem, and then outcomes, whichever one performs best. So that is a very common technique to try to move faster. As far as the other decision to make is what data to use. So more data generally is better, but there's a lot of dependencies with the algorithm with that as well. And of course, bad data negatively impacts your results. So the cleaner the data you can get, the better. There is a step called where you're doing feature engineering and feature cleansing. That's probably getting a little too technical for today. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this does sound extremely complex, but I kind of go back to your initial, sort of why invest. I mean, this is mission critical for most organizations to do something, if not at least deploying some types of technologies that are already using like machine learning features to help them automate or, fast track certain business functions. So talk us through the case study, and so I think people can get their arms around like what's possible,
Sure.
and how to scale.
Right. Okay, so I had a client, the CEO attended a conference, decided that AI and machine learning was important for them to learn. This is a very traditional company. They've been around for over 100 years, manufacturing space, roughly 500, 600 people. They had never done any sort of data science before. Because they've been around for a long time, they had a lot of data, but they didn't have any folks on their team that knew these tools or knew data science. So they reached out to me and said, how do we get started? Ultimately, it was the innovation lab kind of approach is what I recommended, and that's what we tried. The first step that we did, well, two things in parallel. One was setting up the technical environments. So because they didn't have any experience with this, they didn't have the right tools for to do data science, and they didn't want to buy a bunch of servers or capital investment like that. So we set up a cloud infrastructure for them, right? So using AWS, basically set up everything in the cloud. To get started was free, and then I think the first month was like a couple $100. Okay, this is a drop in the bucket for an IT department. And then we needed talents. We needed skills. Ultimately, we ended up going through one of their university connections and finding some really talented young folks from the engineering department of a university, and that was enough to get us started. We brought them in for just for the summer, for like a 5-month period. And well, it was a small team, but we had a team, right? And the next problem was, actually, well, also in parallel, but what to focus on, what to try. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth about, okay, do we want to, this has to be a big impact problem. We have to change the company here, or it has to be a low-hanging fruit, something that we know is going to be a win. And often those two things are in conflict. You can't have both. Ultimately, we looked at where the company has good data, because again, for any machine learning project, it is garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have quality data, that is your first step, and you really won't be able to achieve much as far as the algorithms are concerned. So we knew that they had a lot of good historical data around their clients, around their customers, and so that's the area that we focused on. Ultimately, we settled on a type of problem which is called lead scoring. The basic idea is if you have a lot of information about prospective customers, like people that have reached out to you and sent a request for a quotation or something, and then you have information about which of those RFQs converted to orders, then potentially you could develop an algorithm to predict whether a particular request for a quotation will likely convert into an order. And this, of course, will allow you to allocate resources and do market segmentation more effectively, right? There might be areas where you're consistently not winning the work, and you may want to either divest from that area or place more resources. Those are business decisions that have to be made, but ultimately that would give you more information around that. And there was, so that was the problem. The biggest challenge, honestly, was around data quality. There was a lot of data quality issues that we discovered through this process that they didn't know existed. So they had been working with some bad data in their business, and they just had no one had ever looked, so they didn't know. But it came out in the algorithm because we would run it, we would run the numbers, and either the results would be really, really bad, in which case we knew something was wrong with the data, or in some cases, even something worse would happen, which is we would get near 100% accuracy, which sounds great, but that is very suspect.
Yeah, that's a little
there's something you're usually thinking, okay, something's going on here. And what was going on was that there's something known as target leakage, which again, I think might be a little too technical to go into in very detail, but you have to be careful that you're not training the algorithm on information it shouldn't have at the time it's making the decision. We were including historical data, which was updated later on in time, and the algorithm was using that.
So in terms of how it worked in their business, were you able, has it gotten to the deployment stage yet?
So they have the algorithm, but they are currently in the process of updating their system that would, not updating and completely redoing the system that would essentially be used, that this algorithm would be embedded in. So, this model, as I understand, will be included in the new system, but they're kind of going through that right now.
Yeah, but I just love, because it sounded really lofty when we started and you were talking about how to get this underway, and then it really got to a really tangible opportunity for most businesses to solve a pretty important problem around where they're spending their sales dollars and their sales resources. So lead scoring, I think, is a hot topic for many organizations. Sure. I would assume that it would eventually get somehow integrated into their CRM system so that they could use that right. in one view, one single source of truth. So, but that, I think, I think maybe, people that are just sort of thinking about this type of investment are breathing a sigh of relief that you can do some pretty straightforward projects and possibly, leverage talent that is like emerging and wanting to learn some new things.
So yeah, real quick, when we look at the actual costs of doing this, we did it with super cheap cloud infrastructure and interns.
Yeah.
You can get started really easily.
Yeah, I know we've worked with universities on some of these research projects similar to this, but yeah, that I hadn't really thought about tapping into a team in this manner, but it's going to be now on our radar. So thank you. Lisa, is there anything coming or anything we've missed?
So I think, Niko, one of the questions we received from our Zoom audience was, are there any companies out there that might be well known for doing this? So if I were someone getting into this, is there someone I could emulate? So we obviously know you have a partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers, but anyone else in the market that I could say, wow, gold standard, or other industries even that might be highly using machine learning that I could look to?
Okay. So, well, as far as what companies are using machine learning, I mean, every technology company is using machine learning. I mean, I'm not going to list them because it's just like, what company isn't using machine learning? As far as what consulting companies can help you get started, my company can help you get started. Obviously, Hybrid Intelligence LLC, reach out to me. As far as sorry, what was the other group?
Yeah, just if there were any companies out there, so obviously IT, but have you seen any other, manufacturing companies, retail companies, other people that somebody could go, oh, wow, oh, they're using, machine learning that maybe I wouldn't think of?
Man, it's honestly so ubiquitous.
Okay.
So any company that is sitting on a lot of data, and that could be structured data, like in a database. It could be audio logs from call center information. It could be video. I mean, a lot of media or structured data, and it's trying to identify patterns in that data. And traditional, they've exhausted what traditional analytical techniques can do. Could look into machine learning as a tool.
Okay. I love hearing more of the media piece. I think everyone too, especially in sales, would instantly go, well, we've got a CRM and I've got names and I've got data, but this can be truly anything as long as you've got quantifiable to be able to start reviewing and teaching.
Right.
All right, so next question we got from our audience, and I will say this is the second question that we have. When I had done our intro, I had mentioned this clean one room approach. And so someone asked, like, I haven't heard it brought up yet. So could you explain more about what that concept entails? And Kathy, maybe help out. I know we had that in our notes, so I had used it as our intro today.
Yeah, I know. I don't recall what that was about. So sorry. I can't help.
That's not mine either.
Okay. I was like, it may be something our copywriting team may have come up with as far as the process going through, because it sounds like it is methodical when you are going through, but as you said, there's a lot of feedback loops as you're going through to make sure too that the process is completely happening.
Well, let me say this. I think probably what that's referring to is this idea of not being able to affect change across organization at the same time everywhere. And so going back to this idea of innovation lab being the one room, perhaps that's what they're referring to.
Okay.
Where you're incubating new ideas, new ways of working, and then as certain things work, then you're slowly kind of encouraging them, pushing them out to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, it was probably something from our prep session that was just
really, that phrase stood out. So
yeah,
obviously we made an impact on our internal team. So, well, as we are going past, and thank you for everyone staying a little bit past our typical 45 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and share Niko's contact information. So for those of you who may be watching live or perhaps watching our recording, if you have questions for Niko later, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn as well as via email. Just make sure to include business as unusual so Niko knows where the questions are coming from. Niko, thank you so much for sharing this. I think truly, as you said, there's so much to learn about the idea and the process of data science. So I don't know if we're all data engineers yet, but I think we're pretty close.
Pretty close. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, as we look ahead to next month, as we kick off 2022, we will be starting on January 20th with our first Business as Unusual webinar of the year. We currently have a duo teamed up for this, Claire Ellerhost and Michael Rary. So Claire is the Assistant VP at Fifth Third Bank. Michael comes to us from Capital Strategies, and they're really going to be diving into the trends of 2022. So we all know 2020, obviously looking the past, very hard to predict, had ripple effects into 2021, but what's ahead for 2022? So they're really going to be discussing how the trends, which ones you should be watching for, How is that going to impact business growth? And really giving you that pulse for 2022 and what it's going to do for today's competitive business landscape. You can go to redcaffeine.com to register. We'll also have this up on LinkedIn as well, so you can join via LinkedIn events. Also looking ahead to January of 2022 is Red Caffeine's annual People Plus People Conference. We've had to postpone our date due to COVID, but we are excited to be bringing this to you on January 27th, which is a Thursday. Kathy, I know you're spending a lot of time getting ready for this event in just a few short weeks. Anything you'd like to share with today's audience?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an action-packed day, but a really interactive day. So, we'll be learning from our presenters just as much as we're going to be learning from our sponsors and our attendees. There's just going to be a lot of business insights shared. And, we really want to, have this be a really interactive session. So we're excited to be getting back to a live event format, keeping it to one day so that we can get a lot of people to attend. It's a short commitment, but I think you'll walk away with ideas that will really you'll be able to take, and put forth in your business growth plan for 2022. So you can sign up at peoplepluspeopleconf.com. And so looking forward to seeing everybody live in January.
And as you'll see, when you go to our peoplepluspeopleconf.com website, you'll see badass doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen in a day. So please join us for this one-day event, all of the amazing content, and just getting to meet in person with other fellow like-minded, like-hearted business leaders. All right, as we close out today's session, thank you for joining us for our last Business as Unusual webinar of 2021. You can always go to our Red Caffeine website to watch any of our past webinars that have been started since April of 2020. A lot of great content there. So as you're heading possibly into the holiday break and looking to amp up your business knowledge, definitely check out the Red Caffeine website for more resources. If it's your first time listening to a Business as Unusual webinar, we thank you for joining us. If you'd like to hear more on how Red Caffeine's growth consultancy approach can help your business, you can reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.